We suspended the hearing the last time, and therefore, under our rules, we have a continuing quorum. And we can proceed with our opening statement for this fourth hearing. Magandang umaga sa kanilang lahat. To our resource persons, thank you for coming and joining us in today's hearing of this committee on the Senate Resolution 953 filed by this representation and Senator Frank Drilon. In the last hearing, Maria Ressa, our very own Nobel Peace Prize winner, shed light on how the disinformation industry grew stronger as time passed by. Because of algorithms, our people became more and more polarized at the extremes of the political spectrum. And she said, quote, "Disinformation brings down functioning democracies or may bring down functioning democracies and leads to violence when uncontrolled." Tulad na lamang ng nangyari, as she pointed out, sa Estados Unidos noong January 6, 2021. Some groups started a conspiracy theory about election fraud in 2019. Mainstream media amplified this message. Then hours before the riot, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back was former President Trump calling out the people in social media. Ika nga ni Maria, online violence is real-world violence. In the last hearing also, Maria clarified that this information is not a freedom of speech issue. It is a freedom of distribution or freedom of amplification issue. The Constitution protects our right to information. It does not protect the right of others to spread disinformation. We need to hold the platforms accountable for what they are allowed to spread. In traditional media, platforms may be held liable when they allow disinformation or hate speech, defamatory content to be aired or printed. Ganun din dapat sa online. Kailangan may accountability ang Facebook, Google, at iba pang platforms. In our series of hearings, narinig natin from various large corporations, business groups, academe, media agencies, and esteemed journalists and law experts, lahat against disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, and other evils done online. Walang exception, lahat tutol sa hate speech, disinformation, pagsisinungaling. Advertisers are one in saying that they do not want their ads to appear in channels that promote disinformation and hate speech, and that they will remove their ads in these channels and websites that promote disinformation and hate speech. Therefore, we want to continue with these hearings. Since we all agree that this information is unacceptable, can we agree as to what actions we are to take collectively to address this? Or will it just be merely all talk? We need to look into this issue further. Hindi maaring lip service lamang dahil katakataka na lahat tayo hindi sang-ayon, pero walang maliwanag na patutunguhan kung anong dapat gawin. Yan ang isa sa mga layunin ng hearing na ito. We invited members of the academe who studied disinformation in the 2019 elections. We also invited government agencies to determine their policies as regards disinformation. The DOF and the BIR are here to give us more information about the so-called money trail and whether social media platforms do indeed, or their companies, or the companies that use their platforms, do they pay proper taxes? We should also inquire whether social media entities such as Twinmark Enterprises, whose accounts were taken down by Meta in 2019, if they paid taxes on the reported hundreds of millions of pesos they earned from Facebook and Google. And finally, stakeholders, especially the associations, PANA, MSAP, ASC, and 4As are present here. It is very clear that these organizations adhere to as far as their code of conduct is concerned, or code of ethics is concerned, they adhere to the truth, integrity, honesty. And therefore, we would like to see how these provisions of their code of conduct or their code of ethics uh, goes into play when the ads that are in itself truthful enable or at least are placed in social media platforms that spread disinformation. Is there a disconnect here? Is this a dysfunctional, schizophrenic sort of setup wherein you do have very clear provisions on your code of conduct, on ethics, on honesty, on integrity, on truthfulness, and yet are directly enabling, by way of the ad placements, these social media sites that spread disinformation. And if I may say, rather than go into regulating these agencies by way of legislation, we prefer a stronger, a more aggressive, a more uh, a stronger approach to self-regulation by addressing precisely these concerns. All these are with a view of finding solutions to stem the problem of disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech. Maraming salamat po sa lahat na dumalo and thank you for your cooperation. Consider this a service to the nation as we try and grapple with the negative impact of disinformation in the country. Magandang umaga sa kanilang lahat. And thank you again. May we call on our ComSec to identify our resource persons and acknowledge them? Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, Your Honor. Our resource persons present today, Dr. Yvonne Chua from the University of the Philippines, Dr. Jason Vincent Cabañas from De La Salle University, Dr. Jonathan Corpus Ong, University of Massachusetts, Harvard University, from the Bureau of Internal Revenue, Attorney Mary Gretchen Mondragon, Action Lawyer, Law and Legislative Division, Attorney Ron Michael Uy, Attorney, Law and Legislative Division, from the Department of Trade and Industry, Undersecretary Ruth B. Castello, Consumer Protection Group, from the Department of Finance, Attorney Kirsten Bautista, National Tax Research Center, Legal Group, Ria Maris Parentela Nadora, Tax Specialist, National Tax Research Center, Legal and Communications Group. From the Department of Justice, Attorney Anthony Pauline Pascual, State Counsel, Office of the Cybercrime, the Presidential Communications Operations Office, PCOO, Undersecretary Christian Ablan, Administration, Finance, Legislative Affairs, and FOI, Attorney Joseph Adrian Llames, Freedom of Information, Project Management Office, the Association of Accredited Advertising Agencies, Philippines, for ACE Philippines, Ms. Anna Norbert, Board Secretary, Ad Standards Council, ASC, Attorney Rudolph Hularbal, Legal Counsel, Philippine Association of National Advertisers, PANA, Ms. Meg Yao Kosei, President, Media Specialist Association of the Philippines, MSAP, Mr. Jamie De Guzman, President, Mr. Michael De Castro, MSAP Board Member, former MSAP President, Adele Raymond Tuason, Vice President, MSAP, Memo Moreno, Digital Lead Digital Office. From Google Philippines, Yves Gonzalez, Government Affairs. John Zahel, Head Information and Content Policy. And we also have Mr. Nicanor Gabonado Jr., Public Relations Practitioner. That's all, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, to Attorney Seng. We now can proceed based on the program, the agenda. We shall begin with the presentation of Professor Chua. Is that right? Uh, yes, Yvonne Chua, Associate Professor of my beloved university, the University of the Philippines. Good morning, Professor Chua. Do you have an opening statement?
Magandang umaga po, Senator Pangilinan at sa ibang mga guests po sa committee na to. Isang correction lang po, ako po ay Attorney Seng, hindi po ako doktor, wala po akong doctorate, hindi po kagaya ni Drs. Ong and Cabanillas. Professor Chua po ay okay na po, or Yvonne po. I don't have an opening statement or presentation today. However, I'm going to make myself available to the committee for questions. I understand from the committee secretary that the committee is interested in a study that I have done in connection with the 2019 electoral misinformation.
Yes, we were hoping that you could give us the highlights of your study.
Sure.
Would you be able to do this, Professor?
Certainly, Senator Pangilinan.
Please, yes, for the record, you have the floor.
Thank you, po. In 2019, the University of the Philippines initiated a collaborative fact-checking project called Check.ph. It brought together 3 universities, the UP, LaSalle, and Ateneo, and 11 media partners, including, at the time, ABS-CBN, PhilStar, the Philippine Star, Rappler, Verifiles, ABS-CBN, and a number of others, to fact-check the 2019 elections. Altogether, there were 131 fact checks that came out of that initiative. And these are some of our findings. First of all, as we all found out during those, based on that, the main platform or the main spreader of misinformation related to that elections was, of course, Facebook, which accounted for I'll give you the whole numbers, not the about 67%. Most of the deceptive claims were made on Facebook, followed by television. Please take note that what we fact check were not just those that appeared on social media, but also on traditional media, which includes newspapers, television, and radio. A lot of these came in the form of visuals. They were visual content is the key. At the time in 2019, a lot of these would involve the use of infographics, art cards, quote cards, followed by images or a combination of images and text. At the time in 2019, video was constituted just a smaller proportion. Of course, we're seeing a different situation right now. The main sources of misinformation and disinformation, of course, came largely from netizens or user-generated content, followed by candidates who made false or misleading claims in speeches, in fora, in statements. I'd just like to point out that I think one of the things that people are the most interested in would be who were the most targeted by mis or disinformation in the 2019 elections. Unfortunately, it was the political opposition. The bulk were directed at Ocho Derecho. Of the 131 fact checks that were done, 35 sorry, I need to check. Yeah, the bulk would be against Ocho Derecho. There were a few against Hukbong, Pagpapagod, but these constitute only a tenth of the misinformation. We'd like to also point out that it was not just the party that was singled out, but actually candidates that were singled out. The opposition Ocho Derecho slate, notably Mar Rojas and Pamakino, were the most targeted, who at the time, of course, were initially leading in the pre-election surveys. We'd also like to stress that our studies show that the combination of negative messaging and positive messaging, when it came to the political opposition, this was largely negative messaging. And when it came to Hukbong, this was largely positive messaging. So that
May we clarify that when it comes to
the political opposition, this was mostly negative messaging po.
what
So
was directed at the or
directed against the political
Okay.
opposition, they were mostly negative messaging po.
and then the positive messaging was directed
at Hukbong po. So which means I'd just like to stress that the misinformation or disinformation can be both positive messaging or negative messaging. In this instance, we see falsehoods or misleading claims that were more that tended to promote Hukbong, and in the case of the political opposition, attack them or demonize them, along with the political opposition.
In other words, Professor, lies to attack and lies to praise.
Yes po. Sir,
So both ways, pagsisinungaling para siraan at pagsisinungaling para bumango, no?
Yes po.
Okay.
But I would just like to be careful about the word lie, because it is very difficult to ascertain motivation.
Yes.
And even us among fact checkers and academics, we don't use the word lie loosely unless we're able to establish the motive po. Kasi
Okay.
pwede po namang,
So disinformation or misinformation to promote someone's candidacy, and misinformation or disinformation to attack and to negate or to cancel someone's candidacy. Yeah. Yes, understood.
Yes. In addition po, we also saw that after Ocho Derecho, one of the most victimized was the Makabayan bloc. So those belonging to the Makabayan bloc. But that is not to say that those were the only ones discredited. Even the media, news organizations were also discredited during the 2019 elections. Yan lang po when it comes to the 2019 elections. Thank you.
Okay. One quick question, Professor. That was the 2019 elections. We have a 2022 elections coming up. Given what has happened then and the interventions, if any, or the actions taken, if any, of stakeholders, whether the political players, whether the social media giants, whether government, do you think it would be any different in the 2022 elections?
Senator, we have revived check.ph for the 2022 elections, and this time we have more partners. From 14 in the 2019 elections, we have by now, I've lost count, maybe more than 30 partners. And we already have, since January, curated more than 200 fact checks. Unfortunately, the trend persists despite the efforts that have gone into curbing disinformation. A lot has come out ahead of the May elections. Of the 200 book, and based on our initial analysis, and you will be able to see that book because we come out with weekly updates on the pieces of disinformation that we come across or that have been fact checked. And majority of those are directed against presidential candidate and Vice President Leni Robredo po. So marami po talaga. Every week po, she is the biggest victim of disinformation or negative messaging po. Whether it has to do with the typhoon, with all sorts po. Every week po, there is a theme with presidential interviews. Most fact-checked also po, yes po.
Just on that point, every week since when?
Since January po.
Okay.
When we
So every
started
week since
curated,
yes.
yes,
Okay.
she has turned out to be the biggest victim so far of disinformation or bad actors po. But like I said, there's also on the other hand positive messaging, and we see substantial, also significant volume of false or misleading claims about the presidential candidate Ferdinand Marcos Jr., in which case these are largely positive or in his favor, seeking to promote him. So whereas you would have
Can we hear that? Can we just hear that again? Misinformation to promote him.
to promote him
Disinformation
po.
to promote him.
Yes, to promote
Okay.
him po.
So there is
So
misinformation and disinformation to how do you call it? To attack negatively Vice President Lenny, and there is misinformation and disinformation to
disinformation.
promote Bongbong Marcos.
Correct. At this point po, that is how the landscape looks like. There is a preponderance nga of negative or negative messages against the vice president and positive ones. So if you find, let's say, issues being used against the vice president, in the case of Mr. Marcus, a lot of this would be like endorsements endorsements that are spurious actually from various sectors, from celebrities, uh, from supposed from celebrities, and even
Heads of state.
heads of state like the New Zealand Prime Minister, who was said to have endorsed him when this was not the case po. And of course, a lot of historical inaccuracies that have been revived or that have resurfaced in connection po with his father, the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr. So
Okay.
yun po, sir, so far ang trends nakikita po
So in a general sense, there is disinformation and misinformation to promote a particular candidate or a position, and there is disinformation and misinformation to attack a particular position. I mean,
At this
or a
point,
candidate.
yes.
Yes.
At this point of time, yes, that is what we are observing.
So so misinformation and disinformation to boost someone's candidacy, and misinformation and disinformation to prevent or to attack someone's candidacy. Now, here's a question. One step backward, Professor. I'm sure you've been monitoring this, and you've gained a lot of insight from that 2019 how do you call it, study. Would you be in the position to conclude, or have you been, if you have been monitoring, that in many instances, not just elections, when issues crop up, when scandals are exposed, for example, in the pandemic, in the onset of the pandemic 2 years ago, was there an orchestrated effort, disinformation to promote, the government response, for example, and to attack, those who are critical? That's one, the pandemic. Second, the closure of ABS-CBN. Again, was there disinformation to promote the closure of ABS-CBN, as well as misinformation and disinformation to attack those who oppose the closure? And then we have the Farmally hearings. Uh, would you have monitored? If you did, that there was again the same modus operandi of social media influencers, platforms, accounts attacking the senators and the COA, for example, with misinformation and disinformation while promoting the government's position, the DBMPS, and perhaps even Malacanang, with with positive yet inaccurate or false information and then, of course, and information. Would you be care to comment on that, presentation or how I premised my question?
Yes. I will not venture into both formally at ABS-CBN because I have not done a systematic review of what had happened, and I don't want to err or on the I don't want to make mistakes. However, I have Professor Labiste, my colleague, and I have looked into misinformation and disinformation in connection with the pandemic, COVID-19, and more recently with the vaccination program. And one of the things that we have found out is in the Philippines, especially compared to some other countries, misinformation and disinformation related to COVID-19 is highly politicized. That means whenever there are issues, the political figures are dragged into the issue. And you are correct to a great extent of your observation that a lot of the pieces that we have analyzed, Professor Labiste and I, tend to boost, of course, government's efforts or the response to COVID-19 and vaccination, at, often with the use of false or misleading statistics or information. And there have been a number of instances where public figures or political figures have also been victims of wrong information. And that includes Vice President Robredo, unfortunately. So
Yes.
she's been attacked also a number of times. I think in the Sinovac issue, she was attacked not only by government officials themselves, but also, of course, what followed, as we see, would be supporters of the government on social media. So
Yes.
yun po ang nakita po namin doon sa pag-aaral namin sa COVID-19 tsaka sa vaccination.
Yes, thank you, Professor. In your study regarding the pandemic response and social media's how do you call it? Social media information and disinformation and misinformation. Did you look into sources of misinformation in terms of platforms and URLs? Did you do this, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Pagdating po sa platforms, syempre po ang Facebook po ang nangunguna dahil po ang dami talaga natin sa Facebook. So that is pretty much inevitable, followed by YouTube. But one of the things that we also observe would be it crosses platforms. So it's really cross-platform. It straddles multiple platforms. Something might start with Facebook and jump to YouTube or vice versa, as well as TikTok po. Isa pong nabahala lang po kami would be the way that disinformation spreads within platforms, aside from crossing platforms. And as you know, it could start with a Facebook page, or especially on Facebook, a Facebook page, and then it starts cascading down to communities, to groups, no? So from these groups po, ang mga groups na po to ay iba, samut-sari po. They could be your overseas workers, they could be religious groups, they could be your villages, barangays, they could be mga fan groups, no? And from there, inevitably, you'd see also the connection to our messaging apps, no, such as Viber. So doon po yung proliferation. So it's across platforms and within platforms. Marami pong groups ang involved. Pero gusto rin namin po i-stress na napakalakas po kapag ang gagaling sa public figure or influencer po yung message, no? You see that a lot, no? And when we say influencer, as yung study ni professors Ong tsaka Cabañas have shown, these aren't necessarily your mega influencers, no? They could be multiple nano or micro influencers, yung mga maliliit po, pero napaka-credible po nila. So yun po ang isang nature po ng pag-distribute ng misinformation and disinformation po related to the vaccines.
Yes. Were you
And
able
COVID-19.
to, in your study with the vaccines and the COVID-19 response and social media disinformation or misinformation, were you able to touch on, for example, foreign entities that were involved or foreign sites that were involved in the disinformation?
What we find po, I wouldn't say, when we say foreign sites po, kasi a lot of the misinformation, disinformation, just like in other countries, is imported din po. Meaning to say, they could have started in another country. For example, yung kay Kennedy po, di ba, na anti-vaxxer,
Yes.
darating din po yan. So these are things that spread, and it's a piece of information could have appeared in other countries. But what is interesting po sa study namin is we also have a lot of homegrown na misinformation or disinformation. Ibig sabihin, nanggagaling po talaga dito. At may mga nagkakamali po talaga. Yung iba nananadya, yung iba mukhang honest mistake naman po.
Yes, yes. I asked those questions or that particular question because there have been reports that some of these sites are based in abroad and churning out the information from URLs based in other countries, particularly in this case in the pandemic, no, nakita nila. Also in other issues, you did not detect that in your study.
When looking, kasi we do also source checking or source analysis, yung a number of sites naman po talaga galing po sa ibang bansa because we have diaspora. So yung ang ating overseas workers, communities, maaari po doon talaga nanggagaling tapos kumakalat. So ano po, halos porous na kasi po ang boundaries natin pagdating po sa information these days.
Yes, yes. But I suppose if you had enough technology, you would also be able to identify, no, but maybe you don't have that in your research.
To a certain extent po, we are able to, one of the goals of fact checkers po is to establish provenance. It's not always easy kung saan po yung original source po. That's part ng tinatawag po na source analysis, source checking. However, this also has to do with the nature of misinformation. I think Professors Ong and Cabañas have explained to the committee that when we talk of misinformation and disinformation, what we see, most of us see, would be the distributor at the very end. But actually, it is a chain, it's a web. It consists of content creators, content producers, and content distributors, and content redistributors. Marami po. And they could be different people. Ang pinaka-mastermind po, ang content creator, hindi po laging visible. Kahit po, pati yung content producer. These are often your elites po. Ang nakikita po natin kadalasan ay yung nasa kaduluduluhan na, yung troll na ini-employ nila at kaya ng mga pag-aaral. These trolls could be, your kids, your or people really who allow themselves to be used in order to make money po. So, in order to trace that po, madalas po, ang content, ang may scheme talaga po, once they put that message out and they just light the fire, and then in their case they take down the content. So it is while you have the URL, you sometimes don't see the content anymore. It makes it difficult to hold them accountable.
Yes. Thank you, Professor. We will have perhaps additional questions later on, but at least what I take from you is in the 2019 elections as well as in the pandemic response, you have seen disinformation and misinformation actively being circulated or being undertaken in these various social media platforms. Uh, Misinformation to promote, for example, and to uh, well, sugarcoat maybe, certain personalities and issues or actions taken, or misinformation and disinformation to attack, personalities as well as positions taken by them. Unfortunately, you were not able to go through the closure of ABS and family hearings, but your intelligent guess would be, I would assume, if you wish to answer the question, is it would be no different. It would probably be the same, that there too would be disinformation in a massive scale, and in disinformation and misinformation to promote the closure of ABS, as well as to attack those opposing the ABS-CBN by way of disinformation. And the same with the farmer hearings. At least a cursory review of what you've seen, hindi po ba?
Yes, for those, there have been items that have been fact checked regarding with regards to those issues. However, like I said, I don't have a study on that, so I don't really have evidence to back up my statements as to the extent.
Yes. Understood. Thank you for that, ma'am. And perhaps later on there will be some additional questions as we go along. Thank you for your presentation. And we now proceed to is John Neri present? Before that, we have a video we'd like to play, present for our resource persons, and we hope as they watch it and view it later on, we may raise some questions in relation to the video. Can we have it played now?
Yes, Your Honor.
There is no audio.
Yes, sir.
I think we have to rewind it. I think rewind is a analog term. Wala nang rewind ngayon. This is the trouble with digital technology.
Your Honor, we're having technical difficulties in the Senate. Please bear with us.
But it's okay. Let us know if we have to skip this for the time being, or we will wait.
Sir, if it's okay with you, can we move forward with the hearing? We will coordinate regarding the technical difficulties, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Sige, we'll do that. Please alert us as soon as these technical difficulties have been addressed. Thank you. We now proceed to Mr. Neri. John, are you on board? Do you have a presentation? Is Mr. Neri around?
Sir, Your Honor, Mr. John Neri informed the committee earlier that he will log in around 8:30, or but he is not yet online now.
Okay, so we will just have to skip him for the time being. We go to Media Specialists Association of the Philippines. We thank them for their presence. They are now 1, 2, 3, 4 present here. Is that correct? The
Yes,
president? Yes, president is Mr. De Guzman. You joined us the last time, and Mikey De Castro was the past president. Is that not right?
that's correct, Mr. Chair.
Is Mikey also around?
Yes, sir. He is also in
Gus,
attendance.
Also in attendance.
where is he?
Where is he?
Sorry.
Sorry. Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning,
Good
Mr. De
morning, Mr.
Castro.
De
And
Castro. And
why am I
why
having
am
an
I
echo?
having an echo?
Can somebody
Can
please
somebody please
mute if they're
mute
not going
if
to
they're
be
not going
speaking?
to be
Thank you.
speaking? Thank you.
Yes, good morning, Mr. De Castro. Do you have an opening statement for the Senate committee today? If you do, please go ahead. You have the floor.
Mr. Chair, I think he's having difficulties even earlier. I
Okay,
think he's trying
okay.
to fix it.
Well, okay. Our questions for uh, the the media placement media specialist association. Correct. Please clarify, Mr. De Guzman. It is the association of group entities that make the placements in the in the digital sphere. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor. Basically, media placements in all types of media, all media platforms, from digital to traditional media. We are the ones who book the airtime or the space in those platforms.
Yes. Uh, Forgive my ignorance, but all the while, at least what I understood was maybe 20 years ago, I don't know. It was the ad agencies that made the placements. Or are there still ad agencies that do that? Or is it now a totally disaggregated industry in that regard?
You're correct also, Your Honor. Before, it was advertising agencies because we were full service,
Okay.
meaning within the advertising agency, we would have the creative department producing the ads, and then the media department, the ones placing the ads in the media platforms. But nowadays, we've become separated, meaning there are creative only agencies, and then for us, it's the media only agencies.
And when did this evolve?
I'd say about late 90s, early 2000s that it
Okay.
started.
Yes. Because
Yeah.
in my first campaign in the Senate, that was in 2001. So I suppose that time it was still, not exactly organized in that way. No? Uh, and uh, and okay, so it evolved. Now, media specialist is a separate entity. Do you have your own separate code of ethics or code of conduct as an organization?
Yes, Your Honor. We do have our code of ethics, but these are aligned with the Advertising Standards Council and similar to what our sister agencies, or sorry, associations like 4A's, IMAP, and the like also practice.
Yes, as I mentioned in my opening statement, precisely these are the code of ethics is heavy on truthfulness, on honesty, on integrity, uh, and therefore the question is how does that play into the decision making and placements made, particularly in sites that, as earlier mentioned by Professor Chua, and she has confirmed this, sites that promote disinformation, promote misinformation for purposes of precisely either attacking or promoting a particular position or a set of a set of personalities. For example, is there an effort on your part as an organization to determine, as earlier mentioned by Professor Chua, the most attacked, since January was Vice President Lenny in terms of disinformation, and in these sites, ads are placed. Is there any effort or concern on the part of the MSA, the MSAP, uh, and and again, uh, and the reverse is true. For those promoting candidacies or positions of personalities by way of false information. Is that a concern of MSAP? Is that even considered or factored in when you make your placements?
Yes, most certainly, Mr. Chair. We of course have the obligation to represent our clients, our advertising clients, serve them in the best way by ensuring to the greatest extent possible that we place their ads in safe platforms. We do media strategy, we do media planning in order to uh, ensure as much as we can that we are placing in safe platforms. However, it is not that simple. If we
Here's
recall,
the sorry,
yeah,
sorry to have to interrupt, but here's the thing, Kanga. But here's the challenge to that. Yes, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, that's sir. If we recall in the last hearing, uh, placing in a safe environment is not exactly foolproof, even with all the efforts that we put into it. We can do targeting of audiences, of certain sites, certain keywords, but nonetheless, it is also the limitations of the platforms that we place into, wherein our ads may inadvertently, definitely not intentionally, be placed in um, not so uh, not so favorable content. We
Yes.
do, yeah.
How does it play out that, for example, uh, would the putting up of a negative list? I understand, there is this terminology. There is a negative list.
Yes, sir.
Is that foolproof in that sense that when you say this is the negative list, and therefore none of your ads placements should appear in any of these sites? Is that foolproof?
If we are able to indicate as those in the negative list or those in the blacklist, then our ad should not be appearing in those that we enumerated. In the same vein, we also have a whitelist wherein we are sure that these are sound platforms and credible platforms that we can place into. However, with the millions of sites out there, it is
Yeah.
practically impossible to
Understood.
list all.
And millions of sites that are set up.
Our setup,
So
yes,
you have a list today, but then tomorrow you'll have
there are
what,
more and more.
25,000 new sites created, and therefore they're not in your list.
Correct,
Uh,
sir. And
is that a correct appreciation of the reality on the ground?
yes, sir. The proliferation of new sites and platforms all the time make it harder for us to catch up and ensure the safeguards are in place. So we also rely on our partners, our digital partners, to um, ensure that there is a safe environment to clean up their platforms, so that when our ads are placed, they are most often, and they are most often placed in credible articles or content.
So I'm not sure if you were present in the one of the first few hearings, but I think it was Asia Brewery. The what is this brand? The drink um, that came out in a site precisely that was spreading, well, disinformation about me and my wife. No? Uh, and Asia Brewery said they were surprised. They didn't know, and they said that this was placed by their agency placement, the ones that they hired. So would you say that could be one of those how do you call it, leakages in your efforts to ensure that your products or the brands of your clients do not end up in these sites that spread garbage?
Yes, Your Honor. That could be an instance. If I may make a simple example or analogy. For example, we have our tourism client, and we want to place their ads in tourism-related content. So whether it's tours, vacation, flights, as the target or the keywords, uh, that that would be mostly where the placements would come out. However, it is the context of the content or the article that is also hard to determine. If it will unfortunately be placed in an article about, of course, God forbid, a plane going down, the algorithm would read it as a flight, but it would not have been, of course, a favorable placement on our end, in which case, when we find out right away, we pull it out.
Yeah, for example, your client is Philippine Airlines, and suddenly its ads come out in a air crash investigation. I mean, that would be really,
Yes,
a no-brainer. It shouldn't be there, right?
that's right, sir.
Yeah,
But sometimes
yeah.
it's automated, and so we do our best. We learn every time, in every instance that we do our placements, in order to further refine.
How would you approach then this problem when these gaps happen? Do you have policy recommendations, tighter coordination? Or what is the way forward here? Should there be a whole of industry approach to this thing, that you do have a supra inter-organization entity that takes time out and coordinates? Well, forgive my, maybe I'm putting it very simply, but you're a big organization, 27 billion pesos worth of advertising agency money, ads being, how do you call it, flowing into the digital placements last year, if I'm not mistaken. So, is it possible to use your clout so that you and the social media platforms can come together and come up with a modus vivendi and have a stronger response? I say this from experience because, like I said in the previous hearing, I complained dozens of times and it was never taken down. And the only response given to me was that it did not violate community standards. But when I filed the cases, that's when it was taken down. So do we have to go through that kind of response? I don't want to put anyone behind bars. I just want, precisely to find a way to address this disinformation. I'm fine with that if the if the cases will lead to precisely a more responsive, a more less reactionary and more proactive response from the industry and the players. I'd be very happy. So would you have, you attended the last hearing, maybe at some point prior to today's hearing and the last time that you attended, do you have some ideas? We welcome how industry players can come together and find common ground to address this.
Yes, Your Honor. So, as an association, these are one of the important issues that we have on our table. How to further improve brand safety in advertising. the association actively encourages, and of course, all our members are all renowned media agencies, global media agencies, for the most part, that have stringent rules of their own. And so we are all aligned with making sure the environment is as safe and as secure as possible. We hold constant dialogues with the major digital platforms, getting them to be more accountable with all the unsafe content that's going out there. And aside from our self-regulation, aside from with these hearings are also a very good avenue for legislation to be improved. We also, in a way, use market forces because we are constantly auditing the platforms, showing them we saw that your controls for this platform are good, but your enforcement is lacking. We rank them in terms of how they are able to provide a safe environment. And thus, in our recommendations to our clients, we take that into consideration. Even if you as a digital platform are have a huge consumer base, we also tell our clients that the environment may not be as safe, but a smaller platform that has a better controls. Sometimes we support them so that we can also hold the bigger platforms accountable to keep their content always clean and credible.
Yes. On the question, the Ad Standard Council, you said the code of ethics of the Ad Standard Council is pretty much consistent with, or at least closely aligned with the code of conduct of your of the Media Specialist Association. For example, how would you respond to requiring advertisements to respect religion, Filipino culture, and traditions, Section 3. Profanity, obscenity, vulgarity, or those that are offensive or indecent shall not be allowed, Section 4. So, in terms of ad placements, would you agree that a similar set of standards should be observed and respected and upheld?
Yes, definitely, Your Honor. However, with regards to the ASC and our guidelines for self-regulation, we are able to control those elements when it comes to the ad materials that we
Yes.
screen.
Yes.
However, yes, but
Yes. Yes. Yeah. In other words, your ads clearly do not contain profanity, di ba?
yes,
Or obscenity, vulgarity, di ba? But moving forward, and eventually, if you would care, no, to amend your code of ethics and code of conduct to be more relevant to the times, maybe your code of conduct was put together 15 years ago, when social media was not yet around, or 20 years ago. So maybe that should be part of self-regulation, because your ads may not contain obscenity, vulgarity, and therefore you're consistent with your code of ethics, and yet it's being aired in channels that promote or exude profanity, obscenity, vulgarity, or abusive and offensive language. So I guess that's where how to work on that.
yes,
And really, technology has really put things downside up and upside down, and therefore we have to be quick. No? So what is the agency? The association. What has it done to address precisely these issues so far? Would you, like you said, no, you need to have tighter coordination, etc. How would you describe your industry's relationship with the social media giants in terms of responding precisely to these concerns of the gaps and ads being placed in content or material or channels or platforms that violate or at least are inconsistent with brand security as well as image.
Well, in terms of our association, that is something that we collectively have to work on and table. What is being done on a more regular basis would be the individual agencies or networks within the association have their talks with the digital platforms in behalf of themselves and their advertisers in terms of any concerns or issues that are being raised in terms of unsafe.
In other words, it's one-on-one.
Uh, Often
Yeah.
it's one-on-one as we go about our own agency or network business, but we all know it's the same challenges we encounter when we
Yeah.
when we have our board meetings. Yes.
Yes. And therefore, I'd like to think you'd have more leverage if you act as one, no?
Yes.
Yeah, and therefore will be listened to. How much in your estimate and based on your own experience in the industry, is it correct the estimates given that about 27 billion pesos worth of digital ads were spent last year by various entities in terms of ad placements?
I am not updated with the figure, but I do not discount that it could be that figure because of the dominance already of digital
Yeah.
advertising. Yes.
Maybe Mr. De Guzman, yeah, I mean, this is your association of your entire industry. Maybe Mr. De Guzman would have the data or someone in your group. I'd like to think you'd like to know that as an industry or a subsector of the industry, how much you're worth, diba? I mean, your
If
placement.
If
Diba?
I may, Your Honor, this is Memo. I'm also from MSAT, the digital lead. So in terms of like looking at the total industry spending, currently there is no industry monitoring of the total spends on digital. It is actually by virtue of the platforms that we are into and the millions and millions of publishers that are on hand. So we have been working on getting the monitoring of the spends over the past few years, at least 10 years already, but up to now it hasn't been finalized. So we, as an association, we are working with Kantar and Nielsen in terms of like putting together the monitoring for this. Yeah.
Yeah, I got this from an industry insider. It's about 27 billion. Would anyone from your group somehow have a sense as saan galing ito? I know that it was sourced from a particular office or a particular network or group, no?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an estimate, no? It's a rough estimate, but
Yes.
about 27 billion.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah, most probably po, sir. It might be probably around roughly like that. However, the concern there kasi the declared estimates are just mainly like estimates pa kumbaga. It's not really like the actual money that is put in the system or put in the digital system, because all of us, like all of the agencies have the rates. They have their preferred rates, and also as is by virtue also of the industry itself na parang it's based on auction, based on real-time bidding. So parang it's hard po to really like estimate the spends in the network itself or in the across the different platforms that we currently have.
okay, thank you. Okay, this is my final question, unless a senator later comes in for MSAP. In your professional opinion, uh, where is the responsibility? Who is responsible to ensure that paid advertising is not used to support fake news, disinformation, false information? I'm told we shouldn't use fake news. I mean, the traditional media feels there's no such thing as fake news, it's news. And to say fake news somehow, so false information, hate speech, violence, child pornography, uh, misogyny, among others. No, who do we hold accountable? I ask this because media specialists, the ad agencies earlier said they didn't know because they trusted their placements being done. The agencies, on the other hand, one of them said, uh, you know, we have no control over the algorithms. We trust social media says they have the platforms say they have they have the policies, and you can do a checklist, etc., of negative, etc. But and therefore, social media platforms are saying there is a mechanism that the ad agencies can use just to check on it, and if they check on it, then so who? But apparently, it's not working as well as it ought to. Uh, who should be held accountable?
Well, Your Honor, I think we cannot say just one group will be able to be accountable. Definitely, the media agencies association have that obligation to place properly their advertiser materials in the right sites, and we can do that by intent and by proper planning and strategy. Then the platforms, the third parties, the vendors also need to do their part in ensuring that the plans that we laid out are implemented correctly and in the right sites,
Yes.
and are able to implement more stringent measures, improve their algorithm such that what we intended, which is our advertiser materials, to come out in safe, clean content, does so as close to 100% as possible.
Okay. Okay. And just one last point. You heard Professor Chua earlier, and that there is orchestrated, organized disinformation and misinformation to promote personalities and or positions, as well as to attack personalities and or positions. Is it safe to say that the MSAP uh, uh, does not condone such acts on social media, and are will yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, most certainly, Your Honor. That is something that we not condone as an industry and as as media professionals, and we definitely will avoid and not support in the strongest means such creators, such content, such platforms that propagate these
Yes.
type.
Yes, you will agree with me that when you make such ad placements on these sites that was described by Professor Chua earlier, you will agree with me that unwittingly you are enabling, this information. Is that not right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and inadvertently, we are indirectly supporting them, and which is why that has to constantly be be reevaluated.
And vigilance, I suppose. So I hope I will come to the day that the MSAP as an entity can deal directly with the social media platform, so that you have the muscle to be able to, you know, uh, I say muscle, sorry, but for lack of a better term, but I filed cases against the social media platform as a Senate, well, and they acted on it, but I wonder how they will respond if a lowly, pedicab driver, or uh, a ordinary person who was maligned and attacked and defiled and given threats, etc. How will they respond to one ordinary person? So I hope that you will one day come together and as an organization, as an association, be able to leverage your numbers to be able to get a better responses, for the sake also of your industry, and the clients that you serve. Thank you for those answers, Mr. De Guzman. It's unfortunate that Mr. Michael De Castro is still unable to join us. We
Thank you, Your
we
Honor.
now have Mr. Neri. Mr. John, you're on board. You have 5 to 7 minutes for your presentation. Are you ready? Do you have a presentation?
Good morning, Senator. Yes, I have a statement to read, if that's all right.
Yes, please. Go ahead. Go ahead. You have 5 to 7 minutes to do this. You have the floor.
Thank you for the invitation to join the committee's ongoing public review of existing criminal laws in the light of the rise of social media platforms and the rapid advancement of technology. I am John Neri, a member of several institutions, but I am here at this public hearing in my personal capacity as a journalist and a teacher. Some, if not most, of what I will say are shared by my colleagues at the Asian Center for Journalism of the Ateneo de Manila University and in the university's Department of Communication, by my former colleagues in the Philippine Daily Inquirer and my current colleagues in Rappler, and by my colleagues and fellow advocates in the Consortium on Democracy and Disinformation. But while my remarks may have been shaped by constant and continuing interaction with them, these are only my personal views. I would like to state at the outset that reducing criminal liability for the misuse or abuse of social media platforms is my principal response to the committee's principal question. Society as a whole, the government included, has a responsibility to minimize the harm that social media platforms enable or cause. But that responsibility should be understood less in terms of criminal liability and more in terms of civil and administrative liability, civic engagement, social responsibility. In my view, the principal harm enabled or caused by social media platforms is democratic erosion through disinformation. Society sustains other injuries from social media abuse. But from my perspective as a journalist and a teacher, these other concerns, important in themselves, cannot be fully addressed if the democratic project itself is undermined through disinformation. I am probably not the first person in this series of important hearings to quote the political thinker Hannah Arendt. But let me quote her anyway, because it is difficult to improve on her summary. She wrote, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, that is to say, the reality of experience, and the distinction between true and false, that is to say, the standards of thought, no longer exist." I understand this to mean that the democratic project is undermined and subverted when disinformation distorts, denies, and finally dissolves both the reality of our common experience and our common standards of thought and reason. A review of existing laws, regulations, even customs in the light of the rise of social media and the advance of information and communication technology is then called for. It is from that perspective that I gratefully accepted the committee's invitation. Should the government intervene? Yes. How should it intervene? To answer that, please allow me to share this analytical framework that I have been using to make sense of the phenomenon of disinformation. Think of the usual communication loop. You have a sender at one end, a message from the sender, a channel through which the message passes, and then a receiver at the other end, who may then give feedback and close the communication loop. We can use this familiar image to gain a vantage point in understanding disinformation. Because of the scope and scale involved, we must understand disinformation as having, or rather being, its own ecosystem. We can use the communication loop as a means to understand that ecosystem, and thus as a way to frame our possible interventions. Now, if I could just share just one image. Are you able to see that, Senator?
Yes. Go ahead.
To continue, in the disinformation ecosystem, you have the senders of the disinformation content, the messengers. These include the different tiers in what the scholars Jonathan Corpus Ong and Jason Cabañas call the invisible machine of network disinformation: the architects, the influencers, the operators. But among the agents of disinformation, we must also include even state actors, public officials who use government resources to propagate false or fabricated information, such as made-to-order, matrixed narco lists. We then have the content of the disinformation itself, the messaging. As scholars like Cheryl Ruth Soriano and Fatima Gao have discovered, the virtual infinity of quote-unquote fake news and other forms of disinformation and so-called gray content may actually be classifiable into just a handful of messaging themes, overarching narratives or myths. The third element, the channel, we will need to break into two halves. Thus, in the analytical framework I use, we first have the media, which can be both the target of disinformation campaigns or the unwitting or witting distributors and amplifiers of disinformation. The second kind of channel is populated by the digital and social media platforms, which we can call modes. The last element is the receiver of the disinformation content, the audience. To align with the other dimensions, and with apologies for this rage for alliteration, we can call this element a fifth M, members of the audience. What can society do then to meet the problem of disinformation head on? We can launch and conduct initiatives that will address any of the 5 dimensions of disinformation. The Asian Center for Journalism and the Consortium on Democracy and Disinformation, for instance, is currently conducting a series of critical media use seminars called Fighting Forward, Teachers versus Fake News, which is an initiative to help teachers help their students fight forward against disinformation. This would be classified under the fifth M, developing the capacity of the members of the audience to counter disinformation. To the central point, what can the government, specifically the legislature, do to meet the problem of disinformation? We can use the 5 dimensions of the disinformation ecosystem to think through the kinds of legislative intervention possible. In the first dimension, messengers, it can raise the stakes against state actors who conduct disinformation campaigns. The measures can take the form of administrative sanctions against government officials or employees who use government resources to wage disinformation campaigns against the public it is supposed to serve. In the second dimension, messaging, the legislature can pass 2 kinds of laws that will help counteract the insidious effects of anti-democratic, anti-scientific, historically denying narratives. 1, it can strengthen the capacity of the educational bureaucracy to produce high-quality textbooks. And 2, it can pass a memory law, patterned after that of Germany, that penalizes the denial of agreed-upon historical truths. But I hasten to add that such a law must be shaped by a robust regard for the freedom of expression and should therefore narrow the limitations to the maximum degree possible. Also, such a law must include the ready recourse to independent judicial intervention. In the third dimension, media, the Senate and the House can strengthen the capacity of the government's own massive media and information infrastructure to report the news independent of government influence. In the fourth dimension, modes, the very subject of the Senate inquiry, Congress can hold the social media platforms to account by treating them also as information utilities. And in the fifth dimension, members of the audience, the Senate and the House can strengthen the capacity of the public to become critical and discriminating users of content by reviewing and improving the Department of Education's current Media and Information Literacy, or MIL, program for high school students. But the first step, and I will end on this note, but the first step that the legislature must take is to decriminalize libel. That allows it the political and moral space to launch other, more responsive forms of intervention. Thank you. Senator, I'm sorry, but you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, John. If you can submit your paper,
I will
we
do
would
that, yes.
appreciate it. Well, I have a few questions, but before that, can we have Mr. Gabonada? Nick, are you on? Do you have you submitted the position paper? Can you present to us the highlights of your position paper on the resolution? Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Senator Pangilinan, and
Thank you for joining us.
thank you also for this opportunity to be a resource speaker. I also thank you for giving me the time to put together a position paper. I was supposed to be present last time, but you very kindly give me time to prepare one. Anyway, I submitted a 10-page position paper on the subject. And what I will do today is to summarize the salient points contained in my paper. So, the problem presented to us, harassment, malicious communications, stalking, threatening, violence, and are already addressed by our laws, existing laws. However, there is a new challenge. When these crimes are committed and this on social media, it is very difficult for law agencies and the victims to file the necessary complaints or pursue legal actions. I think you experienced that yourself, Mr. Senator. And why? Because in most instances, the culprits are veiled in anonymity. And second, because the platform owners are not liable for whatever content is carried by their platforms. Unlike the case of broadcast and print media, where they can be sued for libel due to content aired or printed in their platforms. Also, it is a concern that even creators of questionable content are allowed to house and monetize their content in these platforms. So my suggestion,
Could you
here
repeat
I'm
that last one? Could you repeat that last one point on monetization?
even creators of questionable content are allowed to house and monetize their content in these platforms. So, I mean, just a cursory investigation of all these platforms. You will see a lot of this. So here are my suggestions, Mr. Chair. No? We have to set in place ways that can provide traceability and lessen anonymous harmful activities. This can be made possible by one, making it a requirement when opening a new social media account to provide a verified and acceptable ID. And where the account belongs to a person under the age of 18, verify the account with an ID of a parent or a guardian. Further, we can put another layer of preventing anonymity by requiring the registration of all SIM cards. Since an individual cell phone number is one of the requirements for creating a social media account. My second point, any form of cybercrime can hardly be committed without the use of an internet service provider or ISP and or a platform provider. ISPs are private companies that provide telecom services and access to the internet. These are the Globe, PLDT Smart, Converge, Ditotel, and other similar companies. They provide access to the internet, to websites, to emails, and platform providers. Platform providers are Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, and others of this world. And I would even personally include commercial platforms like Spotify, Lazada, Shopee, and the other online sellers. Platforms house content and dictate algorithms. Their algorithms dictate what content will be seen or recommended to the respective users and audiences. ISPs and platform providers play a vital role in providing cybercrime. Due to their direct contact with clients and ability to determine what can be seen and hidden from people, they can operate as guarantors of safety and security of its users and clients. So it is therefore justifiable that ISPs and platform providers be considered as publishers because they actively determine what appears on their platforms and what websites can be accessed and can be blocked. In the same way that TV, newspapers, and radio decide what stories and commercials to run, ISPs and platform providers must be held responsible for the content that they carry and distribute. So I suggest that we should not follow Section 230 of the U.S. Communication Decency Act, as this has made it very hard for cybercrime to be prevented in the U.S., as it removes any form of liability to providers and platforms. My third point, we should make social media networks responsible for its algorithms, which are used to rank content. The algorithms use engagement-based ranking of content, which in some instances could create a cycle of feeding harmful, inflammatory, or untrue content to users. As a first step to this proposal, I would recommend that social networks or platforms release details of their algorithms and core functions to trusted, independent researchers, so it can be vetted. In so doing, we shall understand whether or not such algorithms lead to possibly destructive forms of content amplification. The context of this proposal is this: the social media platforms are no longer neutral environments. Algorithms make decisions about what people see, what people do not see. It is not about restricting one's ability to say what you want. What we are concerned about is the danger of a social media platform's function of artificially amplifying false and manipulative information on a wide scale. The fourth point, suggestion, Mr. Chairman, our law should be strengthened to allow our courts to force platform providers and ISPs to hand over the identities of users to aid defamation cases, among others. Fifth, we need to set up a system where it will be difficult for creators of harmful content to monetize their content. Ideally, there should be an independent non-government body that will review content shown online. Channels which will be deemed purveyors of harmful content, scam transactions, and the like will be identified by this body. The social media platforms and/or content creator will then be compelled to follow or appeal where applicable. This is not new to the industry. The advertising industry has this for years, something like this. The industry has had an Advertising Standards Council that reviews all advertising content shown on TV, radio, and print, and even billboard. We can do something similar for online. And we also have MTRCB, which reviews all films and TV shows. So this is not advertising content that is reviewed, but a body reviewing the channels as to their content. Okay, the last is, there is really nothing wrong with product endorsements. That's a totally good industry. And nothing new with product endorsement, nothing new with being brand ambassadors of certain brands or causes. It is suggested, however, that influencers or page personalities with large followings should disclose to their social media followers whether they receive material or monetary considerations with advertisers, politicians, and personalities, and vice versa. This way, whatever messages they may post, extolling directly or indirectly a brand or a personality, will be consumed by audience with that qualifier in mind. So far, these are the summary of my thoughts, Mr. Chairman, as reflected in my 10-page position paper. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Nick Gabonada, for the presentation. Very, very interesting presentation, and it covers pretty much all the aspects of social media disinformation, including the criminal laws involved, and even the advertising. And thank you for if you can. Well, you have submitted that.
Yeah, I did.
Yes, thank you. We can before we go into the questions. Is the video ready?
Yes, Your Honor, we can play it already.
Yes, because we have some questions to a number of our resource persons based on the video. There is no sound. Can we have the sound, please? The audio? Can we will have a minute suspension as we try to work around the glitch. We apologize for this. The session is, the hearing is suspended. Uh, there's a question here. Can you share it in the chat group? Can you send the link of the video in this chat group? Okay, that's a question. Maybe. Okay, but anyway, another video, another portion of the video are excerpts from an ABS-CBN news report on twin marks and the incomes. The report provides that $150 million at least was earned by twin marks, if I'm not mistaken, and another $50 million. So we would have wanted that placed on record so that we can get our resource persons to respond. So these are the two reports of both ABS-CBN and GMA7 on trolling and the incomes derived from some of these entities that have been involved or engaged in. Is that it? Now it. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we can go to Dr. Ong and Dr. Cabañas because I hope it works this time. There you go. Can we repeat it?
Para isulong ang troll ka ba? Ang troll ay isang taong binabayaran para gumawa ng maraming iba't ibang peking account para isulong ang gusto ng isang kliyente. Let's meet Don. We're hiding him for his own safety. May-ari siya ng isang public relations company, social media strategist, at boss ng isang troll army. Sa ilalim niya, meron siyang 500 trolls.
One troll maintains siguro mga 180 to 200 pounds.
Ang entry-level troll kaya raw kumita ng 30,000 pesos kada buwan, habang ang mga senior trolls kumikita ng 50 hanggang 70,000 pesos kada buwan.
Influencers, well, kapag may request yung client,
And how much should they get?
minimum of 30K
30 for anong gagawin ng
per post.
per post?
How lucrative is this business?
Especially for the chief architects, especially for the ad and PR strategists, it pays very handsomely.
According to an exclusive report from ABS-CBN News, ledgers from Twinmark Media reflected nearly $3 million, or about $150 million in payments from Google AdSense. Andrew Marasigan, in an article on the Philippine Star, said that the messaging agency quoted him 5 million pesos for a 30-day messaging campaign. He said that the tragedy is that social media networks like Facebook and TikTok reward messages that perpetuate disinformation and negativity.
Ang daling makaloko sa social media. Minsan, hindi lumaki sa TV, pero pinapalaki ng social media through the aid of trolls.
Mahigit 200 FB pages at mahigit 70 FB accounts ang tinanggal dito sa Pilipinas. Ito yung mga account na peke at nagpapakalat ng impormasyong kaduda-duda labag sa Facebook guidelines. Isa sa pinakamaraming tinanggal nila ang mga account na konektado sa Twinmark Media. Maging ang COMELEC gusto na ring i-regulate ang social media.
Naniniwala naman ako na kahit may mga ganyang measures, yung mga pwedeng limitahan yung kilos or access nung company namin. So we can always evolve.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. We would like to get a comment from Dr. Ong. You were interviewed in this GMA 7 2019 documentary. So you confirm that you have, we will respect your confidentiality arrangement with your interviewees. So we will not ask for any details, but do you confirm that you did interview individuals actually involved in trolling? Is that correct?
That is correct, sir. For both the 2016 elections, which we did a study for called Architects of Network Disinformation. Also for the 2019 elections, we actually saw how the political trolling industry has actually flourished and expanded and diversified. So while some of the tactics that Professor Chua and Mr. John Neri have already elaborated on, we see a way in which the people at the top have been playing cat and mouse games with fact checkers, with reporters, and with platforms themselves. So as long as we're unable to really spotlight the people at the top, rather than focus on the trolls, the so-called trolls at the bottom, yung mga fake account operators, we really need to have, you actually mentioned it earlier, a whole of society approach in which platforms should be working with legislators, should be working with academics and journalists, civil society, to be really monitoring how this industry flourishes and diversifies. So I would actually amplify what Mr. John Neri was saying, yung caution against criminal and top-down legislation, which could actually create a lot of downstream harms when it comes to free speech and silencing dissent, especially from the political opposition. We can only look at our neighbors in Singapore and Malaysia for examples of how this could be used to attack the opposition. What we're trying to advocate for is more bottom-up approaches and solutions, which require a lot of monitoring, support for civil society, support for independent audits. So audits not done by the platforms themselves, audits not done by the industry themselves, because we can see that they're the guilty party, diba? You would want independent and critical voices who are not tied to any political parties or also fearful of any kind of regulation that might hit their economic bottom line. So for the 2022 elections, just to share, Senator Pangilinan, I worked with sociologist Nicole Corato, with Internews, and we tried to map out the disinformation environment for 2022. And what we're seeing this time around is there's more civil society involvement and participation in terms of fact-checking, also media literacy campaigns, pero limited pa rin yung involvement, particularly ng advertising and public relations sector. So we actually cited how Lente, the Fair Elections Group, has been trying to develop like a code of ethics along with advertising and PR professionals. And we have quotes from our study where they said that they actually met a lot of resistance. So this is Lente, the Fair Elections Advocacy Group, that said that they met a lot of resistance from advertising and PR people who feel that any kind of effort at legislation could harm their bottom line. And I can link to our study in the chat.
Yes. Yes, please. We would appreciate that link. And earlier you said the big ones, not just the trolls. Were you able to interview the big ones in your research?
Yes, Senator Pangilinan. So these are political consultants who, of course, see the elections as an opportunity to lend their corporate marketing expertise to political clients. And of course, they don't call themselves trolls, but we call them architects of disinformation. Kumbaga sila yung head troll, diba? They're the ones to assemble the influencers. They're the ones to assemble the meme producers. They won't be advertising positions na wanted like hiring trolls. They would say wanted content producers or social media community managers. So the whole report that we're seeing is that trolling, rather than seeing it as something out there, something happening in the provinces, something happening in the shadows, it actually exists from within creative industries. There's different ways in which industry jargon kind of sweetens the terminology and creates more acceptable or respectable terms for these kinds of job activities. But kumbaga, trolling pa din sila in the sense na gumagawa ng fake accounts at attack memes.
Yes. And you said from within creative industries. Confirming, therefore, that within the industry, I'd like to think they know who they are.
Yes, we say in our report, it's industry open secrets.
Yes, yes, I read your report.
Yes.
And therefore, this highlights precisely the need to look at what I said earlier, the code of conduct of. I mean, if it's clear that the code of conduct of the industry, rejects, rebukes, and will not condone disinformation and promotes honesty, integrity, and truthfulness, then therefore, would you say that people in the industry are looking the other way, or turning a blind eye? Not all, no, but number. It's an open secret. So, would you say that?
I would affirm that, Senator. In page 11 of the report that I linked in the chat box, under item number 8, we cited our interviews with the Fair Elections Advocacy Group Lente, and I'll just quote two lines from that item, from bullet number 8, where we said, so Lente has done all that they can, drafting a pledge to be signed by partner groups in advertising and public relations. But as one of their officers expressed, the code of conduct, kind of like a code of ethics for the 22 elections, they don't consider it a controversial document. So that's why we're really confused. We really don't understand what these ad and PR organizations are fighting for when it's actually good PR for them, that all of them are coming together to sign a code of conduct. So that's like a direct quote from one of the Lente officers we interviewed.
Maybe the advertising agency representatives can respond to the point raised by Professor Ong. Would that be fine? Mr. De Guzman, Mr. Uh, Maria Belen. Sorry, I didn't get Pana. Would you care to comment on the point raised earlier by Professor Ong regarding the covenant? I mean, that should be a way forward, I would like to think.
I'll be the one to.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, please. May is the president of the Philippine Association of
Okay,
National
May.
Advertising.
Hi, Mr.
Hi, May.
Senator. Yeah, good morning. We'll just read our position paper because I think it states it very clearly there, our support on the same advocacy subject.
Okay, please.
So the Philippine Association of National Advertisers affirms its support in the government's efforts addressed by Senate Resolution 953 to conduct a review in aid of legislation of the country's existing criminal laws pertaining to the rise of social media platforms and the rapid advancement of technology, which has drastically affected communications and business transactions, information dissemination, and social interactions. PANA supports a review of the laws, particularly on disinformation, abuse, misuse, and unlawful practice of social media platforms and tools for as long as it is aligned with our national cultural values. PANA, as the industry organization of the Philippine advertisers for over 60 years, advocates truthful, fair, and responsible advertising and brand building among member companies, inclusive of multinationals and small, medium enterprises. As a self-regulated industry, the content of advertisers, of advertisements and marketing communications of our members are reviewed and screened by the Advertising Standards Council, or ASC, prior to release to all media platforms, respectfully submitted. So we, as a body, we try our best to regulate the content, but in the end, when those content gets out to the platforms, it's really like where it gets tagged to is a bit out of our control. So we feel like the regulation is really on more to see how to work on the platforms. Thank you, Mr. Senator.
Yes, and I think we touched on that earlier, that you are into the creatives, but you are not into the placements. But isn't there a moral, or at least an obligation to your clients that precisely that these content that you put together that are truthful are not associated with, or are not linked to, or are not enabling this information? Is that not? Do you agree?
I think it was also stated that in as much as I think all the advertisers would want to be placed in the correct, but sometimes like if it gets tagged somewhere else that, like this whitelist, and it's sometimes beyond the control. So I think it's really in a way the sifting, the putting on efforts to sift, like what Sir Nick Gabonada mentioned a while ago.
Yes, and on the point raised by Dr. Ong, Dr. Ong mentioned that there was a proposal to have advertising agency executives sign, if I understand it correctly, Dr. Ong, a covenant, for at least to oppose and be and act, on and be active in the drive to address this information. Is that not right, Dr. Ong?
Yes, Senator, it's a code of ethics convening diverse representatives in advertising, PR, also influencer agencies to commit to fair elections practice for 2022. So
And my
very
understanding
low
is
stakes. Sorry.
yes, my understanding is the industry representatives, or at least personalities that Lente approached, were hesitant. Is that right?
Yes. Mhm.
Yes,
They
yes.
were hesitant.
Maybe the industry representatives can look into this and look into this covenant. It's a covenant for what is the term again? Fair elections.
So a code of conduct for the 2022 elections.
Yes, yes. I will not get you to to commit to signing this, of course. That's up to you. But maybe you can, at least those they spoke with, perhaps can reconsider, and you can review, the code of conduct. At least the industry can take a look at it. Miss Sai, yeah, May.
Kosai.
Yes, yes.
I haven't really maybe because I just got the position this year, but we will see because I haven't seen this document yet. So we will review it, Mr. Senator.
We have the ad council here and the 4As. May we request that you at least go through because you play, I just had uh, how do you, what's the term? Recorded, tape, the other day. So I know how huge the role of advertising is and the industry is in the coming election. So your participation is, would be very welcome in terms of, the issue of fair elections. Where is there 4As? Anne, would you care to comment in the point raised by Dr. Ong?
Yes, Senators, thank you for having us again. We'd be more than happy to review and look into this document, Professor Ong. If you could share us a copy, we'd be able to look at it through our regular meeting with the 4A's board.
Yes, and Pana, and where is the ad council? Is the ad council here too?
Mr. Senator.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
My tag is
KBP.
KBP,
Go ahead.
but I
Yeah.
also represent the Ad Standards Council in this hearing, Your Honor.
Yes, sir. Attorney, go ahead.
And I'd like just to respond to the comment of Dr. Ong, Professor Ong.
Go ahead.
I actively participated during the consultations for the drafting of the code of conduct to be signed by the parties involved in the advertising industry. The issue is not so much as whether we support the code of conduct or not, because even the KBP, for that matter, already said that we support it. The issue is the organization of public relations practitioners are the principal party who should be signing, because they are the ones that create the content. And our support is different from the commitment that is being requested of the public relations practitioners, because under the code of conduct, the draft, they're supposed to self-regulate and follow the code of ethics. It's not so much more of the Ad Standards Council or the KBP for that matter, because we don't create content. Also, the Ad Standards Council does not clear content of political advertising.
Yeah.
So there's no
That's
issue about
cleared.
support.
That's cleared by the companies, the networks.
And
Yeah.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
Your Honor.
Okay.
So
Thank you for that clarification. Go ahead. Go ahead. You still have. You may.
no, I was
Uh,
just going to conclude that they really have to talk to the public relations practitioners, because it is their conduct that is sought to be uh, it's the conduct that is being sought to be ethical, or to practice
okay.
ethics in the conduct of their business.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. We now uh, uh, proceed. Uh, may we request an update from Facebook on the matter of Twin Mark, uh, as reported, and maybe the BIR can also weigh in terms of the report of ABS-CBN, if I may. Where, yeah. Um, the, the BIR, where is the representative of the BIR? Mary Gretchen, is she around? Ron Uy, are you around?
This is
There you
Mary
are.
Gretchen.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. Ma'am, it was reported, I don't know if you monitored the report, no, that Twin Mark's articles of incorporation, the owners are Pet, Ken, Hikmat, brother Mark, and based on the ABS-CBN report, the revenue and collating the data obtained from insiders, uh, Twin Mark earned over $1.5 million, or over 80 million pesos, from May to December 2017 alone. The remittances were paid out to several pages with topics ranging from entertainment to politics. The biggest earners were Trending News Portal and TNP TV. And then in Google, that was Facebook, no? Google revenue, Twin Mark ledger shown to ABS-CBN News also reflected nearly $3 million, or about 150 million, in payments from Google AdSense from 2014 to 2017. This could have been more, but Google deducted 3.3 from its payment to Twin Mark after observing that traffic on advertisements appeared invalid. Okay. May we get a comment from BIR? Do you monitor? Namo-monitor po ba ninyo itong mga revenue na nire-report sa social media?
Social activity that are supposed to be paying taxes but are not paying the
Yes.
proper taxes. Yes, there's
And
a
and
task force.
and in the case of Twin Mark, you may not be able to answer it because you just saw it today, no? But could you help us in terms of getting more details regarding the company as to whether they are paying the right amount of taxes, given, or do they have a tin account?
Sir,
Uh,
will do some research on this, Your Honor.
yes, because well, if the report is true, 80 million pesos from May to December 2017, and then 150 million payments from Google AdSense from 2014 to 2017. So, marami silang pera and they earn from it. No? Twin Mark's Facebook revenue, Twin Mark's Google revenue. So that will be interesting, no, for you to look into it, and if you can help us in terms of the information. Nagbabayad ba ng buwis ito? We asked this also because interesting to know, diba, sino nagpopondo nito at bakit tinake down? Maybe Google and Meta can answer the question. What has happened? What are the facts behind the taking down of hundreds of pages of accounts handled by Twin Mark Media Enterprises for mass distribution of fake news? That was the news report. May we have a response from Meta?
Sir, Meta informed the committee that today is a holiday in Singapore, so they cannot attend the hearing today, sir.
I see. Okay, we will have to ask them at a later time then. Mr. Sahel of Google, based on the documents provided by Twinmark, yes, there. First, 2014 to 2017, payments were made of about 150 million. Would you care to comment, Mr. Sahel? Go ahead. You have this from Google, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will need to look into the specifics of the case, which I'm frankly not familiar with. I think as a policy generally, we've got a very proactive approach to dealing with these issues and to trying to cut off the monetization that bad actors might benefit from, and that's across a range of issues from disinformation to piracy and elsewhere. And so we do this both on a reactive basis when we are notified of problems, but also proactively as much as we can. And we're particularly aggressive when it comes to advertising. So just for the benefit of everyone, I will just share in the chat just information on our policies for advertising relating to things like misrepresentation and generally bad ads and how we tackle that. And it's not just that we cut off the arrival of money as soon as we can, but the advertisers that have been identified as being complicit in such schemes will be barred from ever advertising again with us. So we're trying to be as fast as we can, and hopefully I'll have a chance to speak a bit later on again. But I think generally speaking, I would like to highlight that I agreed with a lot of what Professor Ong was saying very eloquently earlier, and I really believe that as I've mentioned before in the first hearing I took part in, I think there is great power in collaborating very closely between the various actors in this space, from researchers to journalists to the online platforms, and collaborate not just in terms of making commitments and on the policy side, which is very important, but very much at a practical level, so we can help each other when we see new actors, when we see new trends, when we see new threats, for us to have information as quickly as possible, being able to quickly go and take down the bad content and cut off the money routes when there are. So I would very much strongly emphasize that. And I would just conclude also by mentioning a related initiative that we just launched in the run-up to the elections. You might have heard of that. Just last week, we announced a program called Facts First PH, which is a first of its kind. It's a fact-checking initiative specifically for the Philippines to help protect the integrity of the elections and to enable the public to make an informed vote on May the 9th. And it's a coalition of 100 organizations from across journalism, academia, civil society, and the legal community, supported by non-profit groups like Medan and Rappler and the Google News initiatives. And I think it's those sorts of grassroots programs and practical collaboration that are going to really help us to root out the bad actors and help people on the ground and enjoy a safe online environment and hopefully have as safe as possible an election in May. Thank you.
Thank you. It's unfortunate that Facebook is on holiday, at least in Singapore. But having said that, we go back to the issue of tax. Is the BIR still around? Mary, are you a regional director, ma'am? What is your position in the BIR?
I am an action lawyer with the Law and Legislative Division, but I also work under the Office of the Commissioner.
Okay. If the information that we received by Digital 2021, the Philippines report of We Are Social and Hootsuite. So these are two items, no? Or two reports. 27 billion for 2021 or 2020. Digital 2021. Do you have information, ma'am, regarding the payment of taxes in this regard? For example, how do Google and Facebook pay their taxes? Do they pay taxes to the BIR, or is it how does it work? Would you have the information?
right now, Mr. Chair, I don't have the information, but if they are registered with the BIR, then they are supposed to pay. But even if they're not registered, but they earn income within the jurisdiction of the Philippines, then they are supposed to pay taxes.
Yes, could you look into this too, ma'am? And maybe Google can. Is Google registered in the Philippines, or is it simply a country? It has a country representative, and it's not based here. Would Google?
Can you, Your Honor, is it Digital 2021?
Yes. It's the Philippines report of We Are Social and Hootsuite, and the amount of digital advertising that flowed into these social media platforms and digital tech, digital media advertising was about 27 billion. So it would be interesting to know how much of that was taxed in terms of, I suppose, VAT would be depending on the circumstances of the entity, the service rendered. No? So if we can request the BIR to look into this and give us some data, we'd like to know if, and also these placements made, are they paying taxes? I hope so. Otherwise, you have influencers precisely who are earning from it, creating disinformation, and yet not, and at the same time, evading the payment of taxes. That would be really a nice, well, not nice, but it's like a holiday, for disinformation, and those profiting from it. Okay. John, if you have anything you wish to add. Oh, Mr. Ives is here. Mr. Ives Gonzalez, could you answer the question? Does Google pay taxes in the Philippines?
Mr. Chairman, Google Philippines Incorporated is a marketing and support entity only.
Okay, a marketing and support entity only, which means the company itself is not based here. Is that right?
The products itself, the advertising is not based in the Philippines.
And therefore, the advertising expenses earned by Google are not, the taxes are paid elsewhere, not in the Philippines.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's interesting. Ma'am Mary Gretchen, would you care to comment? Did you hear the earlier explanation or clarification of Mr. Ives?
Can you see me? I'm not sure if, okay, there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe Mr. Ron Uy can also weigh in. Go ahead.
Yeah. So
Yes, Your
what
Honor.
Mr. Ives said is that Google is not paying any taxes because their advertising is done outside the Philippines. Is that correct?
Could you clarify that, Mr. Gonzalez?
Mr. Chairman, the entity Google Philippines Incorporated provides marketing and support services only in the Philippines.
Yes.
Okay. By the fact that Google is providing marketing and supporting services, it is still providing services services in the Philippines, and any income related to such services or marketing services shall be subject to income tax and VAT.
That would be, and Mr. Gonzalez, you do pay taxes as a marketing entity. That's correct, no?
Mr. Chairman, so Google pays all taxes due and comply with the tax laws in every country we operate in and around the world, including the Philippines.
Yes, except that Ma'am Gretchen, the income derived from the payments of digital advertising does not go to Google Philippines. It goes to Google Maine. So they are not taxed from their incomes that go direct to Google. Where is the company's headquarters? Iceland? No. Where is the company's headquarters?
Mr. Chairman, in the US.
In the US. So would you care to comment?
Mr. Chair, even if the amount is paid in the US, but the services are performed in the Philippines, then it should be taxable in the Philippines. It doesn't matter where you pay it.
So the services provided by Google Philippines, they pay taxes. So what service is Google in the US providing for the Philippine market?
Advertising, is that right? Did I hear it correctly?
Yes, the payment of advertising, the payment of digital advertising to Google goes to the US. So question is, that income of the US Google is not taxed.
So if I may just comment.
Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a question that's been going on for a while, and the issue is that indeed you have only and this is true for many multinational companies. You often have a representative office, as we do in certain countries, and then the tax is apportioned to a large extent in the home market. So what's been going on at the international level is negotiations in the G20 and the OECD, which have been in a concluding phase in the very last few months to try and get to a better system where there can be more, that reconsiders basically how the tax is distributed among countries. So that's happening at the moment. I believe that implementation, the practical implementation is being devised now. So we should see some form of rebalancing when it comes to the activities of multinational companies and the tax that applies for it. So this is something that's certainly been occupying international discussions for a while, and it looks like there's a way forward which is going to become that put into practice over the coming months and certainly years. So I'm not a tax expert, but I understand this is becoming some form of progress has been made in resolution to have a better apportionment of the tax.
Perhaps it's the matter of being taxed twice. You're taxed for your income in the US, and therefore Philippine laws, the double taxation principle. I don't know. I'm just guessing this, but the BIR should probably be able to look into this. And as I explained earlier by Mr. Sahel, it looks like this is also a work in progress in terms of the conflict as to where the taxes should go, given that the services are provided and benefiting, and the benefit is to the local, to the country, the Philippines. Do you have anything else to add, ma'am? Ron, Uy, you're also from the BIR. If you wish to weigh in, go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. As my colleague has said already, Your Honor, we have the same comment on this.
Okay. Anything more, Mary Gretchen?
I think that's it, Your Honor. I just want to inform also that our National Investigation Division has issued letters of authority, although we cannot divulge, of course, who are covered by the letters of authority, issued against the social media influencers.
Okay.
The top social media influencers that they have discovered to be not paying the proper taxes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that piece of information from the BIR. No? Maraming salamat. Unfortunately, I will have to leave because there is a conflict in the schedule. We will be having our Commission on Appointments plenary session. So I will have to suspend today's hearing. Unless Mr. Neri, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Senator, if I can just respond to Nick Cabonada's presentation.
Go ahead,
I
please.
followed it with great interest. He identified 4 suggestions. I would like to focus on 2 of them. One, the idea about anonymity, that's been discussed over many years. But unfortunately, I think that anonymity is overrated. Our own experience tells us that people, even if they are not anonymous, are ready to share disinformation. So I fear that this might be a distraction from what really needs to be done. What really needs to be done? I would go to the second point about, he said, the role of the social media platforms to better select their content, to be responsible for the content that they run. It is true, disinformation is, of course, content, but as the scholarship of Doctors Ong and Cabañez, for instance, have reminded us, it's not just false information. There is also such a thing as Sherry Ruth Soriano also discovered as gray content. So it's actually a combination of all those. So what makes the problem of disinformation even more problematic today is that it's networked. In other words, we must also look at the conduct. And I was really intrigued because 2 months after Twinmark was banned by Facebook, an entire network of Facebook pages and groups were removed from Facebook. And according to Facebook, they were all associated with Nick Gabonada. And they were guilty of what they called coordinated inauthentic behavior. In other words, it's a mix of true accounts and false accounts. It's a mix of true information, false information, gray content. But it's the relationship in all of that. So I think that the focus should not just be disinformation, because then that will just get us stuck in the question of is it true or false. But it must also focus on network disinformation. We must focus on the conduct of different actors spread across different dimensions of the ecosystem and what they're doing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Maybe Mr. Gabonada, is he still around?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, would you care to comment on the...
Yes, please.
Yes, go ahead. You have the floor.
Well, number one, the reason why I talk about the question of anonymity is because at the very least, you know who is talking about you or spreading information, misinformation, gray area information about you. I mean, if you are a writer in the newspaper, you have a byline. You know who is saying it. And if you feel that you are that is something that affects you or that is libelous, you can very well raise a lawsuit against the newspaper and the or the publisher. I mean, the same is true with radio. I mean, there is no anonymity, and therefore it's very easy to say who is putting you at a disadvantage, no? The second thing on my name being included in that network information, I think that's very unfair because if you recall, I was disabled by Facebook. They told us that the press release mentioned my name and said that I am I have a network talking about there is a network. But how could I respond to that? They already disabled my account. I cannot even review what they're talking about. They did not even bother talk to me. And if you recall, I was part of the 2016 campaign. In Facebook then, you can just be part of any Facebook page. You don't have to say yes, you become invited. And you know my role in the campaign is really to organize, to encourage people to talk about the candidate. And therefore, in some instances, my names are included as either an editor or an admin of the pages. I did not even say yes to all of those that was given. But of course, that has changed now, no? And second is, coordinated behavior. What is that in a campaign? When you campaign, you want people to ultimately mobilize themselves, organize themselves, and vote for the candidate. So there is nothing more coordinated than that. Because that is the purpose of any marketing plan. You want people to, you give them messages that they will carry, how good the candidate is, and then you provide them the desire to talk about the candidate, to examine the candidate or to like the candidate, and eventually organize themselves and mobilize themselves to support the candidate in getting the vote for the candidate. That, to me, is coordinated behavior. Is that inordinate? No. Because that is what a campaign is supposed to be. Now, if they say otherwise, and there are other things that they are saying about inordinate, coordinated behavior, I am not there. I cannot defend myself, Mr. Chair, because my account has been disabled my account has been disabled in 2019, right? In March 2019. So there is no way I could check on my accounts. And, we were there during the Pinoy campaign in 2010. We all campaigned for Pinoy. And we asked people we tell people how good the candidate is. We tell people to rally behind that candidate, to attend campaign rallies, to wear the yellow ribbon. May FB na noon, but not as famous as 2016, no? But that's the same tactic. That's the same campaign strategy.
Senator,
that's my role there. Now, gray area, of course, that is something that will have to be discussed. Why? Because if I know that the writer is Juan de la Cruz, then we can discuss what that gray area is. Okay? We can discuss what that gray area is. For as long as we know who we will be talking to,
Yes.
not people that are anonymous.
Just for the information of our colleague, our resource persons, we already passed actually on third reading the SIM card registration law.
That's very good. That's very good.
And it requires telcos to get an ID and a person. So that's naipasa na yun. So it's now ongoing by CAM, if I'm not mistaken, and hopefully it'll be ratified. Henceforth,
that's very good.
Registration of SIM cards will require identification and the presentation of a government issued ID, for example, or its counterpart. But definitely the law as intended will not allow for fictitious or anonymous SIM card registration.
That's very good, Mr.
Senator, just a quick point of clarification.
Thank you. Yes, John, go ahead.
Yeah. So what Facebook belatedly has done is to crack down not on coordinated behavior, but coordinated inauthentic behavior. In other words, it's a network of true and many false accounts and deceptive accounts. My point, Senator, is that when you are studying the problem of disinformation, it's important, yes, to focus on content, but it's equally important to focus on the conduct of the different messengers, media modes, and so on, that circulate the disinformation. So content and conduct. Thank you.
I agree, Mr. Chair. I agree with John on that. But let's remove anonymity, because by doing so, we require accountability as far as the actors are concerned. Madali silang makita kung sino.
Yes, Thank
And I'm
you.
very happy that the SIM card law was approved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for your inputs also, John. Again, I wish to extend this, but I have a Commission on Appointments hearing at the moment. We are to confirm a number of our men in uniform, officers of the armed forces. This is a question I'd like to raise for Facebook. The information that was relayed to me by a former Facebook official in the Philippines is that there were 20 million fake accounts in 2016. And I read in the papers the other day that was it Twitter that removed 300 accounts. So in the universe of 20 million, I mean, 20 million fake accounts, what is 300? Of course, this is the 20 million is a confirmed number from Facebook. And Facebook is not Twitter, but it just gives you, a sense of how much is out there. And if 300 have been deactivated, makes you wonder if what happens to the millions that aren't deactivated, and how lethal it is as they continue to be out there spreading bile and, as earlier pointed out by Professor Chua of the University of the Philippines. But anyway, with this, I beg the indulgence of everyone. I wish we could extend it, but we may have to again reschedule this for a later date. But we'd like to thank everyone at this point for their attendance. Thank you, John. Thank you, Nick. Thank you to the ad board, PANA, MPS, MSAP. Might miss out on the others. No? Oh wait, just one last point. Is the DOF still here? Attorney Kirshan Bautista and of the National Tax Research Center Legal Group. I just have a question. If you're still around, if not, maybe the BIR can relay it. What is there? Okay. Do you have a position paper on our resolution?
We have submitted our position paper, but it's for consolidation and would defer to the position of the DOF.
Okay, okay. No, so we hope you can quickly, expedite, the turnover of the, and hearing what you heard earlier about the situs of taxation and that of Google, would you care to comment very quickly?
Yes, Mr. Chair. For the NTRC po, support the resolution because for currently the government's policy is to fully enforce existing tax laws on online transactions as well. And currently our tax laws are broad enough to cover all types of transactions and not just offline transactions.
Yes. Yes. For example,
Currently,
yes, go ahead.
yes, for the tax implications of ad placement in social media platforms.
Yes.
It also recently there was the BIR issued an RMC for social media influencers because they're also liable for income
Yes.
tax
Yes.
and business taxes, which may either be percentage tax or VAT. And also there's also an RMC covering for advertising entities and online advertisers as to withholding taxes and issuances of official receipts.
So the where does Google and Facebook and YouTube fall in that memorandum? Are they covered?
If they fall under the definition of an online advertiser or advertising entity, it would be up to the implementing authorities to follow the required guidelines.
So sorry, you were lagging or you were muted early in the first part of your statement. What did you say again to the question? Is Google and YouTube covered?
It was not specific po, but there is the RMC covers advertising entities
Yeah, and they are in
and
that
those who
sense.
for those who the parties that pay advertising fees.
Yes, because rather than how do you call this? you have, at least the data is saying that there was 27 billion worth of ads pumped into digital advertising last year. Would you have records as to how much of that actually paid taxes to the country? That's a huge amount, 27 billion. That's you know, would there be VAT services for that? Because if there were, then that would be at least 3 billion, di ba? Of additional tax
Yes,
revenue.
Mr. Chair. Currently, I don't have the information at hand, but I think we can request if, like the BIR has the information on tax collections.
Yes, they'll be preparing the report. So we'd like to really see, you know, how else can we, you know, monitor this industry. Okay, so
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to thank everyone again for this opportunity, and I wish to apologize for those we were not able to ask to speak. But we thank you for your time, and we will have to suspend the hearing, and we will inform you as to when the next hearing will be conducted and who will be invited. You will be receiving the invitations. In the meantime, thank you very much, and this hearing of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments is suspended. Maraming salamat, and good morning to everyone.
Thank you, sir.